Hello! For my final, I wanted to do a walkthrough video on my rig because it is very personalized and mostly convoluted. So there's a lot to look at, and I thought it would be better if I just talked through it myself. Um, and there's a lot to look at, so we're going to pray to God that I don't accidentally skip over anything. So, first and foremost, I'm really happy that I finally decided to add custom controllers because even though it's literally just a curve and it takes 10 minutes to set up, it adds a lot of polish, even though this is very, very far from being polished. So, I'm just really happy that it finally did that and it took me way too long to get to that. So first and foremost, I have my look at controller, nothing crazy, other than it's fancier now. I did in fact get my mouth controller to work with a set-driven key, so now I can open the mouth with just one controller because I was having an issue before where I was trying to have a set-driven key, but whenever I would use the look at controller or the neck controller, it would just keep opening the mouth. And I think I found out that it was literally just because I had it parented using a constraint rather than in the outliner, which is very silly. But now I don't have to have two separate controllers for the top and bottom beak, so I'm very happy about that. And then moving on to my quote-unquote neck controller, because this was kind of the strangest thing I had set up because it's really just a big controller for the back because I wanted to have this lean because for when the bird is flying or if it's literally just like bending over to peck at something. Um, really the only thing I changed is that I changed the pivot point, so it's kind of in between the root and the back. It doesn't really matter where it was, but before I had it literally in the middle of the neck and I would have to both rotate it and use a lot of translate, and I do think I'm still going to have to use a little bit of translate, but moving the pivot point really makes it rely on the rotate control a lot more, so I don't have to do as much translating. Um, but yeah, no, this is kind of just a big disguise for the back controller, but I'm really happy with how this looks now. And although there's a little bit of creasing down here, I think it came a really long way with the weight painting, and I'm really happy with how this works, even though it's kind of really simple. But yeah, now he's posable, and the weight painting is a lot better where I can really quickly easy pose this, especially if he was about to fly, which is a great segue because now I get to talk about wings, and I'm going to talk about them for way too long. So first of all, we're going to look at the wings and I'm going to open them because, whoa, they do that now. Set-driven keys are awesome. Oh my god, whoa. Yeah, so they open and close now, which is really cool. So I have three main controllers. I have one for the skeletal structure of the arm itself, and then I have two for the feathers. For the arm, I used a locator because this kind of has to move in all directions and it's a little complicated to look at. And then this controller is going to control kind of all of the feathers, but then I have this separate one for, oop, wrong one. I have this separate controller for the five end feathers because when the wing goes to close, these all collapse pretty nicely. I don't have to do much other than rotate them a little bit. These are on an orient constraint, so it gives me the opportunity to rotate all the feathers individually, but these five last feathers need a little extra help, so they get their own controller. And set-driven keys were definitely a must because although that looks like it went away pretty smoothly, it's definitely needs a lot of help to get into the right position. But yeah, these are all set up. All the feathers are set up with their own joints, and they're on orient constraints, so they all have their own set of rotation, and it really like makes it really easy to just like adjust the wing all at once. A few like messy things is that all of these covert feathers, I did not want to make individual joints for, because there's double the feathers than there are of the, like the main big feathers, and then there's also covert feathers on the bottom, because that's really the only thing making a nice like bridged gap between the main big feathers and the skeletal arm structure. So yeah, they kind of pop through a little bit, and this is kind of where the wings definitely still need a lot of work. But I know personally that if I ever want to get to animating this, although there's a lot of errors right now, I need to start doing animation tests, because I am going to start to lose motivation. Because as much as this, once I had the mechanism down for the wings, um, it didn't take that long to set up, but it's extremely tedious when you're dealing with so many feathers. So there's a lot of things that I would want to work with, but I do want to start to get to the like animation, starting to get like UV mapping and actually do animation tests of this. Um, but like it's definitely a good start. It's still there's still an issue, as well as this like actually manages to close. This isn't actually what like bird feathers and wings look like when they're closed. So I still want to dabble with the idea of I have this closing mechanism for in-betweens, and then I would probably want to set up a separate model for when the wings are still on the back and I don't have to deal with these wings, and this is just for transition points, and I would switch them out and have them as separate models. I also, but because I do want to jump into animating, I also have these controllers for the general placement of the wings, which is one of the more wonky things, but there's definitely, once you start to move, because I am testing the rig a lot. Oops. I am testing the rig for movement a lot, so there's definitely like areas where that looks fine, but on this side, there's going to be a lot of clipping, and although this is like kind of a really wonky control, it's going to add, it's definitely going to help if I just start animating this right now, because it's going to give me a lot more, wiggle room on placement and adjusting clipping. Although it's literally just a control like over the whole group, it's definitely going to help if I want to jump into things sooner rather than later. And then overall, I also have one big controller that opens and closes the wings in one big motion. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on the wings. Definitely needs a lot of help in the future, but I definitely came a long way with this, and it's a miracle that I even got to this point. Um, so we're gonna set everything to 0, and this is going to take a minute. Moving on, which everything is a little anticlimactic now that we've gotten to the wings. I have my tail controller, also a little bit wonky, looks very silly. Definitely silly, but this is also just a way to mess with the back controller, so that everything is a little more unified, and this also needs a little bit of help. But yeah, this is also just, this is mostly so that I could have like one big unified motion with the back, because I definitely put thought into that this is like based off of a real skeleton, and I want it to act accordingly. But yeah, so fixing this. Most importantly about the tail is that the feathers move individually in quotations. This is kind of what I worked on over the summer when I had planned to do a lot more with the wings, but even so, this kind of opened up the doors for me to think that having the individual feather control on the wings was even possible. And ironically enough, now that I've done the wings, I definitely want to do a lot more in regards to the tail, even though that this was the open door for getting the wings done. I would like to have, I don't, I think this was just parenting. I don't think it was, constraints on joints or anything. I mean, it was, I don't think it was an orient constraint or anything where I would like to consider adding more constraints so that these feathers could also, this does have a little bit of bend to it. But I might like to consider even more individual feather control. This actually looks pretty nice and I'm pretty happy with this. But I might think about that if I ever come back to the rigging phase of things. But actually I'm pretty happy with how this works. And I think it has a lot of good bend to it, as long as you don't mess with it too much. Also, one more thing I would add is definitely add a set driven key, because whoa, that's a thing I know how to do now, just so that these I can have one control so that these spread out at the same time and I don't have to do them individually. That would literally take 2 seconds. I would just have to get into the mindset to set that up quickly and go through the rest of my controls, because there's more controls that would also need a little bit of help. That's not going to take long, but that's definitely something I am going to do in the future. Moving down, I have the foot controls. I have one big control for the whole foot. I have ankle movement, which actually causes a little bit of a headache, even though it's not that crazy. This is another area that probably needs some help weight painting, because although it looks pretty good because I know how this works, if you go back and you pull it right up, there's a little bit of creasing. But overall, for the thing it needs to do, which is if the bird is flying or landing on a branch, the feet would be up here if they were flying. And there's a few things where weight painting needs a little bit of help, but overall I'm pretty happy with how this works right now. And then I have toe controls. I have one for the back toe, one big one for all the ones in the front, and then individual toe control. And then I have one big control to curl the entire foot so that I have a quick grabbing motion and I don't have to mess with all of the toes individually. So other than that, that's about it. Root controls, you know, the basics. Yeah, nothing else that I can think of at the moment, but overall, this was an insane take on for me to do. It took 2 semesters to get a whole rig, but I'm really happy that I managed to get this far at all. As much as I expected this to be a 1 semester project somehow. I'm really happy with how far I got in this. And I do think that I would like to jump right into doing UV mapping so that I don't lose motivation with this, because I put a lot of effort into getting a good rig, and I would like to have, at the very least, a handful of animation tests and if anything, this is a really good rig for posing right now. So I can get a few really good renders out of it. But yeah, no, I'm right now in a happy place with this. So I really hope that I continue with this project and I don't lose motivation, and I am going to make it a goal to do all these things before I eventually graduate and don't have access to Autodesk anymore because I'm no longer a student. But I am going to try my very, very hardest to continue with this, and I really mean that right now. And I will definitely be bugging Claire in animation too, even though I am no longer a TA. I will absolutely still be harassing Claire. Um, so I will try to show up with something. Thank you so much for a great semester, and please give me any notes, and I hope you liked my rig.